Welcome once again to the Ascension McKinney podcast. I'm Pastor Seth Williamson. I'm the lead pastor and church planner for Church of the Ascension. We're a small startup church here in McKinney, Texas, and we're excited about all the amazing things that we know God's going to do through us and is already doing through our church. Today, we're going to talk about why you should consider being part of a church plant, because it's just as good for you as it is for that church as it is for that community. You know, a lot of people, when looking for a new church, they begin to think about all the different things their family needs. Does it have a nursery? Is there a children's ministry? Is there good preaching? Is there good music? Is the parking situation good? How far is it from my house? Do we get along with everybody? Do we fit in here? There's a lot of decisions to be made when looking for a church. But very few people ever put church plants into their search for a church to belong at. They don't ever think, well, a church plant, is that really something that would check all the boxes that I need? Is that really something that'd be good for my family? Because here's the thing. A lot of people get kind of down on the church shopping culture. And in many ways, it deserves some criticism because there could be some selfish and even sort of consumeristic things that are getting mixed into your search for a church. But I do want to say this. I believe that most people who are looking for a church are doing so with a good heart. I don't think that you're being, bad or like sinful about it. I think that your search for a church and the categories that you have in mind are probably because you think that's what's really best for you and your family. Well, my challenge to you is to think about how a church plant may actually be what's best for you and your family. And if you're someone who wants to take your faith more seriously and wants your family to be more devoted to God, then being part of a church plant at least once in your life might be something that you should look into. Because after all, you probably want to follow Jesus. I'm assuming you want to follow Jesus. If you're interested in this and you're watching this, you want to follow Jesus. It's not that you just want to be at a cool church. You want to get closer to Jesus, which is why you go to church at all. And you probably want your family to follow Jesus too. You want your kids to become Christians and make good decisions. You want them to follow after Jesus. And you want them to also love the Lord. And you want to be obedient to Jesus because you believe in him and you believe that God is real and you have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so as a result of all these things, those are really the heart of probably what you are looking for the right church for you and your family. And I want to reassure you that if that is your motivation, for looking for a church, then a church plant should definitely be something that you should consider being part of. Whether it's my church plant or another church plant somewhere else around this nation, you should consider being part of a church plant at some point in your life. So we're going to talk about a few different things today, really sort of 5 things. We're going to talk about how being part of a church plant is a great structured way to follow the Great Commission. We'll talk about why the size of a church plant is actually a good thing. And then we're going to talk about why it's actually better to give than to receive. Then we're going to talk about how church plants sort of help us to understand the state of our world. And finally, we're going to address probably the most common objection to being part of a church plant, which is, what about my kids? So that's kind of our outline for today. So first, let's talk about how church plants are a really structured way to follow the Great Commission. We all have heard the Great Commission, right? Jesus said, go into all the world, making disciples of all people, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all the things I have commanded you. Okay, that's the Great Commission. The church is supposed to continue to go out and make new disciples. That's what our job is as Christians, okay? We all know that. And for many of us, we know deep down inside that's something each of us is supposed to be doing. And I'm sure you want to do that, right? I'm sure you want to follow the Great Commission. I'm sure you want to see your friends and family come to know Jesus and experience the love of God and become part of the family of God and get to live in the presence of God on the new heavens and new earth forever and ever. I'm sure you want that. But here's the thing. I bet you have a little bit of stage fright. Maybe you feel a little paralyzed by the whole thing. You're not quite sure what to do next. Okay, I want to do that, but how do I do that? Where do I do that? I'm not sure how to do that. And maybe the church you're at, they have evangelism classes or they do a series in evangelism, but it kind of still makes it seem like evangelism is the job of like a special group of people. There's the pastors, and then there's this evangelism team, and they do outreach ministry, or those like street preachers, or it's the special forces of the church. Those are the people who actually go out and do evangelism. But what's amazing to me is that pretty much every person I talk to, they were led to Christ by just an ordinary person, not a pastor, not a Billy Graham kind of person, but they were led to Christ by a Sunday school teacher, by a parent, by a sibling, by a friend, by a random person they met on a street or on a train. Okay, most of us, 99% of us, are led to faith by just ordinary men and women like you, like me. All of us have this amazing responsibility. And when we think about, wow, all the things that God has done for me, wow, all the things that Jesus has done for me, all the amazing things I've experienced by following after Jesus in my life, we can point back to that person who led us to that point. That ordinary person, we say, thank God I knew so-and-so. Mrs. Smith, my Sunday school teacher, or Mr. Jack, my next door neighbor, or Bob, my friend. Thank God that person told me about Jesus because I love Jesus. I want to follow Jesus. Jesus means so much to me. And if that person hadn't told me about them, then I would not have this wonderful gift. And so all of us are asked to be evangelists in one way or the other. And all of us are so thankful for the ordinary people that God has placed in our life who told us about him so that we can become Christians. But how do you do that, right? We know that anyone can and everyone should, but most of us aren't exactly sure, okay, how do I do that? And when you're part of a massive church or just an established church in general, it can become very difficult to figure out how exactly to do that. Well, this is where church plants are really, really good at this. Church plants are like 10 times more effective at sharing the gospel than established churches are. And by the way, it's not saying established churches are bad. I'm just telling you the data. Let's talk about annual conversions. Okay, so for a church plant that's 5 years or younger, they lead one person to Christ every year for every 3 members they have. But an established church that's 10 years or older, they lead one person to Christ every year for every 89 members they have. So the evangelism rate really slows down. So chances are, if you join a church plant, you will lead someone to Christ. Whereas if you were just part of an established church, you might not have been able to do that. Okay, so that's because everyone is expected to sort of go out and share their faith, right? If you want to grow this church, people need to come to Christ. We're really motivated to do that. But also, you're sort of put in a community of accountability where everyone is talking about it. Everyone's being trained to do it. You're being given some really practical tools and tips, and you're being guided by a pastor in order to do this in a really hands-on way. And so if you're someone who's been interested in sharing your faith, you've been wanting to share your faith, but you're not sure where to start or how to do that, being part of a church plant is a really powerful place to start. It will help you be able to share your faith in a way that you never thought you'd be able to do that. So if you are ready to take the next step and go out into your community and bless your community and share your faith with those around you, being part of a church plant is probably a better place for you than being part of an established church. Again, nothing wrong with established churches. One day, my church plant will become an established church. But one of our goals as a church plant is to keep planting churches out of our church. So even as our evangelism slows down, we are still involved in evangelism in a powerful way all over North Texas and beyond. So that's one reason why I would challenge you to think about being part of a church plant, because it is a great structured way to fulfill the Great Commission. Next, let's talk about the size of a church plant. Obviously, church plants are small. we're just a handful of people right now. And one of our goals as a church is to get to 50 committed members so that we can launch public worship on Sunday mornings. That means 50 people who give, serve, and attend. They've signed on the dotted line. Yes, I'm committing myself for 12 months to this church. I want to be part of actually getting this church off the ground and being part of the genesis of this new congregation. That's what we're working on right now as a church plant. And so that's a small group of people. 50 is a small group of people. 6 is a small group of people. And there's actually a benefit to that a larger church might lack. You might hear my daughter playing in the background during this video. So small environments actually create some vulnerability. When you're in a really big church or even a medium-sized established church, you're able to just sort of slip in and slip out, and no one ever really sees you. They don't ever ask you any questions. They don't notice when you're gone. They don't ever hold you accountable. But when you're in a smaller group, you do have that sort of level of accountability. So let me say something about this really, really quick. If you don't like big churches, you think they're bad, you hate them, you find them to be offensive, and you hate crowds, and so you want to join a church plant because you like it being small, that's a bad reason to join a church plant. Because I fully expect that one day our church will be 200, 300, maybe even 400 members. That's just what happens as churches grow and as they get involved in communities. They start out small and it's very, very slow growing, but as you begin to sort of pick up steam, you grow bigger and bigger. And so if you're a person that says, I basically just want to go to a Bible study instead of going to a large church, then that's a bad reason to join a church plant. But I will say this, I'm not saying you should always be part of a church plant. What I'm saying is you and your family might consider being part of a church plant at least one point in your life. Because being part of a vulnerable, intimate group of Christians like that who are all working towards the same goal can actually do a lot to really shape you in your faith. We all have moments in our faith that really shape us, seasons we go through that shape us as Christians. One really powerful season for me was when I worked for a children's camp. This camp was a traveling performing arts camp for kids that was Christ-centered, and it was hard work. I was a camper and it was fun. Then when I became a camp counselor, it was hard work. And every single weekend, we spent in a van driving to our next destination. And we'd sleep on the floors of churches. And we would eat whatever was on sale. And from the moment we got up to went to bed, we were on our feet, either teaching children and dancing or setting up gear or solving problems or moving heavy things around. But all of it was to serve the gospel. All of it was in the name of Christ. And it's something powerful that when you offer even a cup of cold water to a little one, how close you get to Jesus. That experience, that sort of season I went through in my faith has completely changed me forever and ever. I will never be the same. Now, I don't work for that camp ministry anymore. Now I'm a full-time pastor. And many of the people who work for that camp are not in ministry. They're out doing other things in the world. Some of them work for the government, some of them do theater, some of them just have businesses and families. But all of us were changed for the better, hopefully, by being part of that camp ministry. And so what I would say to you is all of us need to go through a crucible. We all need to go through a season of testing. And when you get involved in a small community of Christians where everyone knows who you are, they know your story, and we're all working shoulder to shoulder to go out there and rescue people from the gates of hell, you can see that will have a big impact on your life going forward. So that's sort of the benefit of being part of a smaller group of Christians, of being part of something like a church plant, because we are involved in each other's lives and we face challenges together. We become a family. And yes, the family will grow, and just like any family, the kids go off to college, some people pass away, some people move away, families change, but that family experience shapes us in a permanent way that actually benefits us for our faith. So whereas the size of a church plant can be a challenge because it's like, wow, do we have enough people to even do what we want to do. It can actually be one of our strengths as well, because God gets some really focused time with you as an individual Christian and as a Christian in a family. Again, we can't stay there. We have to move on to grow and invite more and more people into our fellowship, which means you get less time with me, less time with other Christians. There may be even a day where some of our early members have a party at their house and I'm not invited. Okay? And that may kind of sting at first, like, wow, we used to hang out all the time. But that's a good thing, because that means our church is functioning like a healthy church family. That's the benefit of looking for something as tiny as a church plant, that at the beginning you go, wow, there's just a couple people here. But have the eyes of faith to know that the kingdom of heaven starts as a mustard seed. But when it grows, birds can rest in its shade. So smaller means more vulnerable. Okay, let's talk next about giving and receiving. I'm going to read to you a verse from Acts chapter 20, verse 35. Paul is talking to the elders at Ephesus, and he says this: "In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" Now, that's pretty incredible, okay? So Jesus has just told you a secret about how to receive a blessing, okay? If I told you a secret, like, okay, go do this and you'll receive a blessing. You'll be blessed by God. God will look upon you with favor. God will smile upon you if you go do this. You go, okay, what is it? What do I got to do? I got to stand on my head, jump on one leg? Do I got to go run a marathon? What do I got to do? You have to give as opposed to receive. So many of us look at things that we get as blessings from God. We say, wow, God, thank you. I received my paycheck that I'm able to use to pay for my lifestyle. Or, God, thank you so much that I got better, that I received health. Or, thank you so much, God, that I found a wife or a husband. Thank you for all these things I received. We look around the things that we received, and we view these as signs of blessing from God. But actually, it's those moments where we actually get to give that are blessings from God as well. God may give you something, and you don't know why he gave it to you. You don't know why God handed you this blessing. But in that moment when you finally get to turn around and give it away, that's when you realize, wow, that's why God gave me that. That's when I know I'm more blessed to give than to receive. When I was a teenager, I briefly got interested in woodworking. And so my dad had this wood shop out behind our house, and I would go out there and I'd find spare wood and I'd safely play around with all the different tools and saws in the workshop. And I built different things. I built a workbench. I built some coat racks and that kind of thing. But there's one thing I built that actually turned out better than everything else, was this little tiny stool. It was an itty bitty teeny tiny stool. And I cut it and it looked pretty good, and I stained it and I sanded it, and I didn't know what to do with it. It's incredibly tiny. And for most of the time, it sat underneath my computer desk like a footrest. Okay, so I just felt one day to go build this stool. Well, a little while back, my mom came to visit us, and she was bringing some childhood things for me to have. And one of the things that she brought was that stool, because they had gotten rid of my computer desk, and she thought I might like to have it because I built it. So, okay, thanks, Mom. This is a great gift. I'm glad I have this back. Well, our daughter has cerebral palsy. She is not walking yet. She's just starting to crawl. She's not running or talking. She's about to turn 2. And that was because she was born really early. And so as part of her physical therapy, we had to do all these exercises with her. And one of the exercises is something called bench sitting, where they have to sit on a little stool. And we were looking around our house feeling like, okay, what are we supposed to use for this kid to sit on so you can get enough core strength to actually begin to walk? And there it was, that little bitty stool that I built when I was a teenager that my mom brought me from home. And I sat it on the floor, and with our physical therapist, we put our daughter on top of this stool, and she sat, and it was completely the perfect size. This tiny little stool that I built when I was in high school, I had no idea why I was building it. It was too small for me to sit on. It was a footrest for me. Was the perfect size for my daughter to sit on. and has helped her get stronger and actually grow and get through her special needs. See, I didn't know back then. That's why God sort of put in my mind, why don't you go out into the barn and play around with that? Betty, why don't you bring this to your son? Bring that stool to him. And then one day when our physical therapist said, we need a stool, God right there gave me the thing that I've now given to my daughter for her to sit on, to use for her to grow. And now that's Emma's stool. It's not my stool anymore. It belongs to my daughter. So you have no idea why God is giving you these things, but you do know this. When you finally turn around and give them away, that's when the blessing is complete. The blessing is complete when we turn around and give things away. When we begin to look for a church, a lot of times we look about the things that we can get out of our church. Can I make good business connections here? Am I going to receive wonderful messages? Am I going to hear great music? Am I going to have a good children's ministry for my kids? Is there going to be retreats to go on? What am I going to get out of this relationship? But do we come to a church looking for a place to give? A place where we can practice and use all the gifts and talents that God has given us? We should be looking for a place where we can give more than we can receive, because it's more blessed to give than to receive. I look back on my life and all the different skills and talents that God has placed in my hands, and now that I'm planting this church, I know exactly why I used to like to make movies as a kid, because now I'm making video content for our church plant. All the different little things I learned from that summer camp, I'm now using as a pastor planting this church. And your story is the same way. God is giving you gifts that he wants you to turn around and give away so you can complete that blessing in your life. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And so if you're at a church where you have no opportunity to actually turn around and give, you have no opportunity to give of your money, to give of your talent, to give of your time, and all you ever do is receive, 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 you are not completing that blessing God has given to you. To complete the blessing is to turn around and do what Jesus said, give. And that's what being part of our church is about. Every person who comes and joins our church commits to 12 months to tithe to our church, to serve our church, and to give of their time, talents, and treasure to make this church a reality. Why? Because church plants change lives, and they're a great way to go out and fulfill the Great Commission. So if you truly want to be blessed by God, you should be looking for an environment where you can give more than you can receive. And a church plant is definitely a place where you can give more than you receive. So this next one I've titled Get Properly Briefed. And you may have been seeing that kind of hanging around over there, wondering what does that mean exactly? Okay, well, a lot of us go through our lives sort of living in a blissful ignorance. And in fact, that's one of Satan's best tricks he uses. One of my favorite books is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And if you haven't read it, you should. Basically, here's the premise of The Screwtape Letters. It's a junior demon writing letters to his uncle demon for advice on how to best tempt a human he's been assigned to. And so in the very first chapter of the book, Screwtape is writing to his nephew Wormwood, and he's saying, listen, I understood you took your patient, the human, to a museum of natural science, and you're trying to make him think about evolution and how unlikely it is that God exists. That's a really bad idea. Don't let him think. Don't let him think about the universe. Don't let him think about evolution. Don't think about biology. Don't think about anything. In fact, he should sit down in front of the TV and watch TV forever and eat until he feels nothing and drink until he feels nothing. Don't ever let him think, because when he begins to think, he'll eventually think about God. And then God wins. Satan doesn't want you to think about him. He doesn't want you to think about angels. He doesn't want you to think about death or the afterlife. He doesn't want you to think about anything other than yourself. And so, as Christians, even as Christians, we can walk around living in blissful ignorance, just going about our days, doing our jobs, driving home, pulling in the garage, shutting the door, turning on the TV, putting food on the table, and just sort of ignoring the rest of the world around us. It's very easy to live in this sense of blissful ignorance. But here's the thing. There's so much more going on around the world than we could possibly think. I use this phrase, get properly briefed, in a couple other contexts. One of them is in the context of hunting. I grew up in a community where hunting was a big thing. Maybe you don't like hunting, that's okay. But I think it's important for everyone to go hunting at least once in their life because it shows you where your food comes from. If you're a person who eats meat, but you've never actually gone out and hunted for your own food, you don't actually know where your food comes from. Now, why do I say that? Because I think that eating meat is immoral or that animals are mistreated? No. I think eating meat's totally fine. And I think that going out and hunting is totally fine as well, as do most people who live in Texas and in my home state of Virginia. But the reason you do that is because once you kill an animal so that you can eat and live, you've learned something about the world. You've now been properly briefed. Hey man, the world is a crazy place and something has to die so you can live. Now, I'm not going to unpack what all of that means, okay? There's a great documentary by Steve Rinella, if you're actually interested in that topic, okay, that you could actually go watch this hunting documentary on why we hunt. But what I'm trying to say is this. All of us need to understand the way the world actually is. If you live in this little bubble where your steak just shows up on a plate, but you've never seen a cow or been in a cow field or seen a cow get slaughtered or butchered, and all you do is receive the benefits of that, you are living with an incomplete knowledge of the world around you, and it will affect the way you treat everything else around you in your life. The way you think about food, the way you think about the way you eat. Everything is affected by the fact that you are disconnected from that part of our world. So church plants actually help you get properly briefed about the world around you. See, Satan is totally fine if you go to church. Yeah, go to church. That's fine. I mean, don't talk to anybody when you're there. Don't ask any questions. Don't really get involved. Don't serve anywhere. Just pull into the parking lot, go in there, sing some songs, hear a sermon, and go home. I think the devil's totally fine with that. But when you get involved in a church plant and you say, hey, we're going to go out and make a difference, and then things get really hard and challenges begin to be thrown up against you, and things begin to happen to people because you're actually trying to live out your faith. You go, wait a minute. Why is this happening? What's going on? And suddenly your eyes are open. Sorry about that. Suddenly your eyes are open to the fact that we're in a war. There's a war going on around us. We're not in this sort of neutral zone. We're not Switzerland. Satan wants the world. Satan wants you. And when you get involved in a church plant, it gets really hard to ignore the fact that all around us, all the time, there is spiritual warfare happening. It reveals to you something else that will make you change the way you view church and your faith for the rest of your life. You get properly briefed on the way our world is, because you get to go to the front lines and see the battle for yourself, as opposed to just sitting comfortably from the back row, never actually getting involved in the fight yourself. I think it's so important. Once again, it's sort of related to my first point, but by getting involved in a church plant, you will see the world differently than you had seen it before by just being part of a church plant, because now you've seen it yourself. You may have heard stories from other people about this stuff, but now you see it personally. No longer it's someone else's story. Now it's your story. And you can be a firsthand witness to those around you about what it actually means to be part of the fight for this world. So those are the main things that I want to say about that. But there's one last point I want to make, and that's probably one of the most common objections that we get from people about being part of a church plant. They say, what about my kids? What about my kids? Again, I think people are incredibly well-meaning when they look for a church that's a children's ministry. And as far as our church goes, we have it as a priority to have a children's ministry and nursery from day one when we launch public worship. But it's not going to be the same as being part of a high-production children's ministry at a larger established church. So let me say a couple things about that. First off, in order to get to the point where you have a large, high-production children's ministry, it takes people being part of a very simple, small children's ministry to actually build it up. There has to be people who came before that point. So once again, you get to eat the steak, but never actually got to go out into the fields, into the pastures, and be with the cows. You have to be with the cows before you can truly appreciate the steak. So we all love the steak, the big children's ministry, but not a lot of us are a big fan of being out with like cow patties and stuff like that. So it does have to start somewhere. Everyone has to actually start by building a children's ministry from scratch, and then it can grow into something really amazing. And so it's not that, when a church has no children's ministry or they're meeting in a home doing Bible study. Because right now, this is what we're doing as a church. On Wednesday nights, our core team comes to my house and we have a Bible study together. There's no nursery. There's no children's church. There's no, praise band. There's nothing like that. Everyone, including my wife and I, we watch our own kids. So kids can come and run around our house and we sit down and have a Bible study. Now, you might say to yourself, aren't my kids missing out? Shouldn't there be something especially for them? Won't my kids miss out if all their friends are part of these really amazing children's ministries they love, but my kids are part of something small and different? Well, again, we're going to have children's ministry, but let me say this. Your kids, just like you, will get an experience that no other kids get to say they have. I think one of the reasons I'm in ministry is because my parents involved me in ministry when I was a kid. Now, my dad's not a pastor. My dad was a dentist. But my dad was also a very faithful man involved in ministry. He's a Gideon. Those guys that put Bibles in hotel rooms. And I would go with my dad and watch him put Bibles in hotel rooms. I'd go with him, watch him hand out New Testaments at fairs. I would see him hand out New Testaments at schools. I'd hear the stories about my dad going into prisons and sitting down with inmates and telling them about Jesus and giving them Bibles. And I learned a very powerful message from watching my dad. The Bible is an amazing book, and it's really important, and we should read it. I didn't learn that in a classroom. I did, but the lesson was actually taught to me by watching my father. That's when I learned the importance of the scriptures. My mother was the VBS director for our church. And so when all the other kids went home after VBS, I stayed behind. And I helped put up decorations. I followed my mom around and watched her recruit teachers and organize all these people to put on a VBS. And there were like thousands of kids at our VBS. I got to see behind the scenes. And so while everyone else got to sing the songs and eat the snacks and then just go home, I stayed and I loved it. I love nothing more than wandering around that big empty church, seeing all the other classrooms the kids didn't see, hearing the teachers talk about the ministry they did that day, hearing the stories of victory from my mom and these other kids. And after seeing all that, on Celebration Sunday, watching all those kids get baptized after they accepted Jesus at VBS, I said, this is amazing. And so when your kids are actually involved, when you involve them in ministry, it actually causes them to love Jesus even more. Instead of hiding them from the hard parts of church, you should actually involve them in ministry because that will actually cause them to be part of the church even more. This is probably one of the biggest things about missionary kids. Missionary kids tend to stay in the church longer than many pastors' kids do because missionary kids are usually intimately involved in the work of their parents' ministry. Now, that's not a universal thing. Everyone has rebellious tendencies. Not everyone wants to get involved in ministry. But what we know is this. If you're worried about your kids, you shouldn't be because they will look back on those days of getting to do things like put out the chairs for church or helping to, set up the soundboard or put out donuts and coffee, or staying afterwards when everyone else has gone home. They will remember those things, and they'll say, church was an important part of my family's life, and I want to make it an important part of my family's life too. And so if you're looking for a place where you can follow Jesus more nearly, where you can see your family want to follow him more nearly, and where you can obey Jesus with all your heart, I want to ask you to prayerfully consider being part of a church plant, as well as considering being part of an established church. I'm not saying you always have to be part of a church plant, but it's something I think every Christian should be involved in at least once in their life, because it might be the very thing you didn't know you were looking for. I'm Pastor Seth Williamson. Thank you so much for listening to this. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, to like this video, and also make sure you share with others. Leave a comment below about anything you had questions about, or if you have ideas for future topics you'd like us to talk about on the Ascension McKinney podcast. God bless, and we'll see you next week.